Hi, Bill Vales here. Get ready for the 2019 Littleton Middle School Science and Engineering Fair. It will be held on Thursday, April 25th from 6 through 7:30 p.m. in the Littleton Middle School Gymnasium. This is one of my favorite shows to produce. This event showcases the innovation, creativity, science, and engineering knowledge of the Littleton Middle School students. The students have worked very hard putting together projects over many months, starting with project proposals, planning, determining materials they need, building their hypothesis, building project components, testing, compiling their results, and displaying their projects in concise and entertaining ways. To raise your anticipation for the 2019 Science and Engineering Fair, we will be replaying the 2018 fair. This event will impress you in so many ways. Mark your calendars. The 2019 Littleton Middle School Science and Engineering Fair, Thursday, April 25th from 6 through 7:30 p.m. in the Littleton Middle School Gymnasium. Hope to see you there. Hi, Bill Vales here at the Science and Engineering Open House, and I'm here with Mikey Tail. Mikey, how are you?
I'm well, how are you?
Good, good. What do you have here for a project?
All right, so the title of my project this year is Increasing Carbon Dioxide Concentrations May Be Killing Honeybees. An analysis of the effects of increased carbon dioxide levels on the protein concentration and 10 essential amino acid concentrations for Apis mellifera L and pollen samples extracted from Brassica rapa.
Okay. Now we know carbon dioxide has some very adverse effects on life. I mean, carbon dioxide is a
greenhouse gas.
A greenhouse gas. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so essentially what I'm focusing on in this experiment is the problem of there's not an exact cause of colony collapse disorder. And you may have heard what colony collapse disorder is.
Yes.
It's the die-off of bees on a very large scale.
Yes, and they don't know why.
Exactly, yeah. They've suggested a lot of causes, but in this experiment, I'm testing my very own cause, what I think may be a potential cause of colony collapse disorder, which is the increasing carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere.
Yeah. Now, how much carbon dioxide is in the atmosphere now?
Right now, there's about 406 parts per million of carbon dioxide.
Okay, so we've really reached a point in society where we've gone over the 400 parts per million measure, which is significant.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
All right, so essentially what I'm testing in this experiment is how the increased carbon dioxide concentrations are affecting the primary protein source of honeybees, which is pollen. So what I did in this experiment was I grew plants and I enhanced the amount of carbon dioxide and I tested the proteins and amino acids in the pollen.
Okay, so you enhanced the amount of carbon dioxide in the plants that you grew?
Yes.
How did you do that?
So I used 3 different methods of carbon dioxide enhancement, and I had 5 different crates, as you can see here. And I grew the plants in these bottle reservoirs, and I had 4 of these in each crate, and I grew 160 plants in total to obtain the most data and accurate data that I could.
I see. So you had a nice controlled environment?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Where'd you have these? All through your house?
Yeah, these were at my house.
Yeah, how'd your parents feel about that? Never mind.
Yeah.
So, what did you find out?
So I found out that in this part of my project, that the data does not support the hypothesis, but this is only a preliminary part of my project, and I'm working on other parts of my project that actually do support my hypothesis that the increased carbon dioxide concentrations are decreasing the protein in pollen.
I see.
So in this experiment, I only tested one method of CO2 enhancement because this was how much time I had for the school science fair, but for the competition, the data I'm obtaining for that does support my hypothesis.
Yeah. Now, I'll be interested to see your other projects that you're doing on this. Do you think that because this didn't support your hypothesis, it had something to do with the sample size you were using? Or do you think just the technique itself proves the hypothesis doesn't hold?
Yeah. So my best reasoning as to why this plant group specifically, the protein concentration did not increase, is because in this method of CO2 enhancement, I used a CO2 cylinder with a gas hose. And at regular intervals, I put in CO2 into here. But the CO2 wasn't coming out at a constant flow. So I put it in, and then it came right out of here. So they really weren't being exposed to a lot of CO2. So therefore, what I did was I used 2 other different methods of CO2 enhancement for a constant flow of CO2s, and that's where I'm seeing the very significant change in the protein.
So your the experiments. This is science. This is great. So the experiment you were doing before. Wasn't that the technique wasn't holding true, but how you modeled the experiment.
Yeah.
You had CO2 leakage. Out of this.
Yeah.
Wow, great. You want to say something about the dangers of CO2?
Yeah, sure. So as carbon dioxide concentrations are increasing in the atmosphere, right now, we don't feel as though it's affecting us, but it's going to be affecting the future generations, which is going to be affecting our children. And we need to understand how dangerous carbon dioxide concentrations are to all aspects of our life.
Yeah. What are some of the other greenhouse gases?
Because some are methane. I didn't do a lot of research.
Water vapor.
Yeah.
Is another big one in CO2.
Yeah.
I think CFCs contribute somewhat, chlorofluorocarbon. Things like that. But CO2 is the big ticket item. This is great. I remember interviewing you last year. What did you have last year for a project?
Yeah, so last year I looked into how chemical fertilizers affect aquatic ecosystems. So it was also an environmental project in biochemistry. And I tested how the different fertilizers could negatively impact the aquatic ecosystems by overgrowing plants, which is a process called eutrophication.
Yes.
I won't get too much into that.
I remember. Well, this is a great project, and
thank you.
I want to wish you luck going forward. It seems like you have a lot of interest in science, biology, the environment.
Yeah.
I really encourage that.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, I'm here with Apana Daycare, and she has her project here. And what's your project about?
My project is about trusses and their strength.
Okay, stress on those struts. Okay, what got you interested in this?
Well, my parents were both engineers, and I just became interested in the field, and I've done a lot of science projects on it ever since.
I see, good for you. What's your hypothesis upon it?
My hypothesis is that the proud truss, which is this truss over here, would be stronger than either of the Howe or Pratt trusses. I thought it would be stronger than the Warren truss because both the Pratt and Howe trusses have vertical members, which is like the vertical line.
Vertical member.
And the Howe truss wouldn't support downward force as well as the Pratt truss's V.
Okay. And by vertical members, you're referring to this member here?
Yeah, those
Okay.
members.
So there. Oh, I see. And this one doesn't have vertical members.
Yes.
I see. Okay. How did you test your hypothesis?
I tested my hypothesis using 3 methods. One was hand calculations using the method of joints, which includes engineering and physics. I also used RISA, a structural modeling software. And thirdly, I used Pasco, which I built a model and connected to load cells so I can find the graphs.
Yeah. So you have a computer model here of 3 different types of trusses,
Yes.
and I guess you have some modeling software,
Yeah.
so you could apply stresses through the software.
In RISA, I told the computer that I was putting that much load on the bridge, and it calculated itself. In Pasco, I actually put this load, and then I saw how it reacted on the computer. But I actually did it with a model.
I see. What did your testing show with respect to your hypothesis?
Well, my hypothesis was incorrect. The first hypothesis was correct, though, that the Warren truss was the weakest. It turned out to have the highest compressive and tensile forces, which is bad. With the Pratt and Howe trusses, it was very interesting, actually, because they had the reverse data, as you can see. So, because I was saying that it was a steel truss and not any other material, steel is best in tension if you're pulling it outwards. So because the Howe truss had higher tensile numbers but lower compressive numbers, it was stronger than the Pratt truss if they were made out of steel.
What are the different types of stresses? I see you have tensile force
And compressive
Okay,
force.
so how would you show what a tensile force is?
A tensile force is like this.
So it's like a
pulling
stretching,
outwards. Yeah.
pulling
Like
out.
you're stretching. And compression is the opposite of tension when you're pushing it together.
I see. Would you recommend to bridge builders that they use a Pratt truss?
If they're building out of steel, it would be useful.
If you're building out of steel, okay.
Steel is the most common material. That's why it's chosen.
I see. Well, this is a very well put together project,
Thank
and
you.
you're a very well spoken engineer.
Thank
Yeah. What grade are you in?
you. 7th.
7th grade. Very impressive. I want to thank you very much, and I hope you keep up with your studies and your studies in science and engineering.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, now I'm here with Carly Buckelew and Rachel Boyer. Okay, so Carly, why don't you start off and tell us a little bit about your project? Give us an overview.
Well, this is our project Lightspeed. It was a study on the effects of magnetism on the rotations of the galaxy that we made.
So this is the galaxy.
Yes, that is our project. And there's the bottom half right here. Like that. There we go. Okay, so in our project, what we did was we
changed the level of magnetism that was in our project. We changed the level of the magnets to see if it would affect how many rotations that the galaxy spun when we would spin it in the trials.
So when you say you changed the magnets, you put in more magnets?
Yes,
so,
we did.
So you vary.
Well,
you vary.
One of our controlled variables was that we did not change the number of magnets, but it was different magnets themselves. So one of the magnet sets was ceramic. These are neodymium, which is a much stronger type. Neodymium is an element on the periodic table of elements.
Okay, so those are rare earth magnets.
Yes.
Okay. Did you have any alnico?
No, we did not. We only had ceramic and neodymium.
Okay, where'd you get your magnets?
The stronger neodymium ones we bought offline, and then the ceramic magnets we bought at a hardware store.
Okay. So what was your hypothesis?
So we hypothesized as the level of magnetism, or the pole force of the magnets, as it is technically called, increased, then so would the rotations of the galaxy, because these magnets on the outside would be pulled in stronger, and therefore it would propel the rotation speed more. So the independent variable in our project was the level of magnet.
Okay.
And then the dependent variable, or the thing that resulted because of that, would be the number of rotations.
The number of rotations.
Yeah, or the
okay,
speed
so you could
of the galaxy.
vary the number of magnetics, or the number of magnets, meaning the strength of the magnetic
Yes.
force. And you wanted to see how that affects. Okay.
So our procedure consisted of 28 steps from how to form the galaxy and how to test it. We had this here, which was our diagram showing how to construct it. And this is our picture. In the middle school library, we would hang this from the ceiling and we would spin it for 30 seconds, and then we would stop it while videotaping it. Then we would count the number of rotations.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are you interested in cosmology? I mean, what got you interested in it?
Yeah, that was the inspiration for this, was that we were both really interested in astronomy and galaxies especially.
I see. How many galaxies are in the
Universe?
in the
Billions.
universe?
Unknown. It's completely unknown because our universe is expanding. So you don't know.
So many. Yeah, too many to
But
count.
there's literally hundreds of millions
Yeah,
of
there are
galaxies,
so many.
which is a number far greater than what was thought when I was your age.
Yeah, it's incredible, really, the amount that we have learned.
advancements.
Yeah, in
Okay,
science.
how fast does light travel?
1.72, I think.
186,000 miles a second.
I think there's a 172 in there somewhere.
It's
Well,
like,
it may be when it's expressed
yeah,
in
when
a
you
different
scale it.
different form.
Yeah.
I think it is.
So anyway, our results, what we found from this experiment was, yes, indeed, our hypothesis was correct, that as the level of magnetism increased, or the pole force of the magnets increased, then the rotations also increased.
Yeah. So, do you think that there's galaxies out there that are spinning at different speeds, and the speeds change over time?
Over time, maybe if the black hole itself were to change, hypothetically.
So when you say the black hole, where does that come into?
So in the center of every black hole, in the center of most galaxies, there is a supermassive black hole. In the middle of the Milky Way, we have Sagittarius A, which is a supermassive black hole, and that is in the center, and that's what was our center.
Our inspiration, basically, for doing
Yes.
in the center.
However, there are some galaxies known as irregular galaxies without a black hole in the center. And so that's part of what we have here. We from our research papers, we learned a lot about stars, galaxies, gravity, and black holes.
So have either of you or both of you, have you read A Brief History of Time and Space?
I have not.
Well, you have to read that by Stephen Hawkins.
Okay.
Okay, and he died, he passed away recently, but he was, his research was so well known for black holes.
It was amazing, yeah.
Yeah.
This is, just seeing this sort of attracted me in the presentation, but really the topic itself. So I think it's great that you're interested in this area of science, and I hope you remain interested in it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'm here now with Vivian Lance, and Vivian, this is the second year that we've talked.
Yeah.
What's your project on this year?
So sort of like last year, I focused on water and the problems. Like last year, I dealt with the lead in the water. This year, I was dealing with oil spills on water.
Okay.
So my project was using phytol and avocado oil to create a solution that would contract the oil on the water so that would be smaller segments and easier to deal with.
So in both your projects, it seems that you're looking for natural materials that can help mitigate a problem.
Yeah,
Okay.
I've just always been, it's upsetting to me to see when like animals or people are hurt because their water isn't correct. And even like ducks or birds, they get in the oil spill, they try to clean themselves because of our mistake and they end up putting it into their digestive system and they end up dying because they can't process it.
Well, I would say to you, stay upset about it because it seems to be motivating you in the right direction. So take us through what your hypothesis was.
Well, so my engineering goal for this project was to make a solution made of phytol and avocado oil that will cause the oil to contract, making it easier, less expensive, safer, and faster to remove from the water after oil spills. I also wanted the product to be non-toxic and biodegradable so that organisms wouldn't be consuming it and dying or have it be in the water for a long time.
Okay, so how did you go about testing your hypothesis?
So what I did is I obviously couldn't put the phytol in the solution into the actual ocean with oil because one, they would potentially hurt many organisms,
Yes.
and two, it would be very hard to keep track of. So I took ocean water from a real ocean and I put it into separate containers
I see.
so that I could simulate an oil spill.
I see. Well, you needed a contained environment.
Yeah.
And an ocean is contained,
Yeah.
but it's pretty large.
Yeah, I probably have to swim a while to keep track of it.
Yeah. So how large was the container?
So I just used like a plastic container. I believe it was like 24 ounces, but I only filled it up to 2 centimeters because I wanted it to be, I didn't want to use too much ocean water and I wanted to be able to put it on and still be able to look at it and everything.
Okay. And take us through the process.
Okay, so what I did was after I created the oil spill, it was 10 centimeters in diameter. So I have 4 prototypes because in my readings, it told me that this phytol would biodegrade, but it did not tell me whether it was toxic or not because that's a factor I wanted to test because that's something that's very important. I don't want to be using something that would make our lives easier and it would be faster to clean up when it has no benefit to the other organisms in the water. So what I did is for my first prototype, I used the minimum amount of phytol. I used 1 milliliter of phytol to 3 milliliters of avocado oil. And so I chose avocado oil because I wanted, if the phytol was toxic, I wanted to pair it with something that I knew had like really great things in it, like omega-9 and things that could benefit the organisms. And I also wanted to choose something that has a high smoking point. And so what I mean by smoking point is these like fats and everything, like avocado oil, they get to a point where they get so hot that they start to release these terrible, like, it'll be like these disastrous chemicals that would harm organisms. And so avocado oil has a smoking point of 512 degrees Fahrenheit. So I was pretty sure that it wouldn't be releasing any of those chemicals. And also I know that it has such great stuff in it, it could potentially benefit the organisms.
Now, how would you measure whether something is toxic or not?
So I got these little things called Daphnia magna. They're like little water fleas. They're microscopic, but I can still see them with the naked eye. You just can't see their heart. So what I did is I put my different prototypes on them, and then I took their heart rate.
You measured their heart rate?
Yeah, well, I mean, their heart, it's so they're...
Oh, you could see it.
I could see it beating.
Wow.
So, I took their heart rate at the same time. So I checked the diameter of the oil spills after all the different prototypes, 5, 30, and 60 minutes. And so, getting back to my results of like my prototypes. So my prototype 1 took after an hour, the maximum time. It took the diameter of the water, of the oil spill on the water from 10 centimeters to 0.25 centimeters as the maximum diameter of the spills.
That's quite a decrease.
Yes.
Really?
And so I found that when I put the solution on, it would break it up into different segments. So that's also something that's really good, because you can imagine these people who try to treat the oil spills, they're dealing with these like miles long oil spills. So this solution was breaking it up so they would be easier to deal with.
Right, smaller, manageable, divide and conquer.
Yes.
Yes.
And I also found that the minimum diameter after an hour was unmeasurable. So that meant that I couldn't use a ruler to physically measure them. They were just too small. So then for prototype 2, I wanted to see if the more phytal I added to it would be more powerful.
Yeah.
So so it was 2 milliliters of phytal to 2 milliliters of avocado oil. And after an hour, the maximum diameter of the segments was 0.2 centimeters.
Okay.
So it did a little better than prototype 1.
Okay.
And also like prototype 1, it was unmeasurable for the minimum.
I see.
So prototype 3, I stayed with that system, and so I had 3 milliliters of phytal to 1 milliliter of avocado oil, and so that decreased it like it was not that great of a difference, 0.1 of a centimeter, but I guess in like if it was scaled bigger, that would be a big difference.
So did you find the improvement to be sort of a linear relationship, or was it exponential?
It didn't. I think it was exponential because I could not find any relation for these measurements.
I see.
I did 4 trials for each one. They all came out the same, but I was not noticing like any like relationship between it. But I did find that the pure phytal prototype, it did not change it like after 60 minutes, it did not change it from prototype 3. So that's where it became like, oh, maybe like my toxicity testing would help me understand this better. So I found that prototype 1 and 2, they didn't affect the heart rate of the Daphnia at all. So I had, as you can see, some of the graphs in here. It's a little hard because there's a lot of pages. But in here, so that's prototype 1. But in here, I found that I established on the control Daphnia what their normal heart rate was. So I found that their heart rate could be as low as 144 beats per minute and as high as 152.
And you did all this through observation?
Yeah, I did it a couple times though, every time, just to make sure that I didn't mess up, because it's pretty hard when you've got these little organisms kicking around. And I had to make sure they had enough water, but not too much that they'd be swimming around frantically. And I made sure that they were all on the petri dish that I was looking at them under for the same amount of time, so that their heart rate would be accurate.
So take us to what your results were and how that compared against your hypothesis.
So for my toxicity testing, I found that prototype 1 and 2 stayed in the normal range of the Daphnia, but after an hour of prototype 3 being on them, their heart rate had gone below the normal range. And at prototype 4, the pure phytal, after 30 minutes, it dropped it out of the normal range, and then after 60 minutes, it went even lower. So I started to realize the phytal does get to a point where it becomes harmful to the organism. And so then that's where, so then I also tested for biodegradability. So I took the pH of the water to see when it would biodegrade. So I used pH strips, which aren't the most reliable, but I could see a difference in color. And so, so I found that the pH of the water after I put on all the prototypes was 6.5. When without the prototypes, just ocean water with oil, it was 7. And so it was a little
So you're reducing the pH.
So it was a little curious to me, though. I was like, well, why is this happening? Phytal is all natural and everything. And so then I looked it up, and I found out that phytal, it can be converted to phytanic acid. So that gives it that acidic
I see.
quality. And
see.
so that happens when bacteria or other organisms process it. But I found that the pH returned back to normal after at most 24 hours because I took it each day, and it stayed the same for the rest of the days. At 7, it was normal.
I see. Well, I didn't think you'd have a more impressive project than last year, but you do.
Thank you.
This is really good, and I'm really glad to see that you're. It seems that you have a very consistent thread of interests
Yeah.
and motivations, and I think
Yeah.
that's great. So I encourage you to keep on with this.
I hope that oil companies will now realize that instead of using these silicone-based herders, which are they're all chemicals, they're basically swapping one poison for another because they're made of chemicals that don't biodegrade. I would hope they would use prototype 1 because it has the least amount of phytal but still gets the job done, and it will biodegrade. And so I want that to be used instead of these harmful other solutions.
Well, I think the best way to convince people to do that is through science and not emotion.
Yeah.
So data is hard to refute.
Yeah.
Very good. Nice job.
Thank you.
Well, I'm here now with Taryn Evans, and Taryn, you have a project that just drew me right in. Can you explain your project, please?
So basically, I studied global warming and how certain factors, namely reproduction and mutation rates, would affect how long species survived when faced with climate change. So I picked this project because I wanted to study global warming and like exactly how bad it is and how much risk species are in being endangered because of global warming, but I couldn't really test that, so I decided to test how certain factors affected that.
Okay. Okay. So I see here that you have some key concepts that drive your study, and probably the key concept, as I see, that all these others are based on are Darwin's theory of evolution.
Yeah.
Okay. Have you read Darwin's work?
I haven't read it, but I've learned about his theories.
Okay. Okay. Take us through your research question and your hypothesis.
So basically, my research question was, out of 4 simulated species with either high or low reproduction and mutation rates, which one would go extinct the last, or which one would survive the longest? So in order to figure out my hypothesis, I researched evolution. So I figured that a species with high mutation rates, so that it could receive helpful adaptations, and a high reproduction rate, so that it can spread those adaptations, would survive the longest because it would be able to evolve the quickest when faced with global warming.
Okay. And are you trying to determine that how the global warming affects the rate of mutation in these species?
No. So I'm studying how the reproduction and mutation affects survival, and so they're surviving against global warming. So global warming makes it more difficult for them to survive as time increases, and the reproduction and mutation rates, I'm studying whether they will help or harm their survival while battling global warming.
I see. So some species possibly will be able to adapt to global warming,
Yeah.
and others won't be able to, and they'll go extinct.
All of them went extinct eventually, but I studied which ones were able to survive the longest because of these factors.
Did you have so what was your sample of species?
So I had 4 species. So species A had high reproduction rate and high mutation rate. Species B had high reproduction rate and low mutation rate. Species C had low reproduction rate and high mutation rate, and D had both low reproduction and mutation rates.
So were these actual species, or these were?
No,
categories.
Yeah, these were more like categories of species. So I just coded them on Scratch. So in order to make it relevant to more species, they didn't really have many characteristics. Apart from reproduction and mutation rates, because I wanted to make it more applicable to all species and not just like say like honeybees or beavers or whatever.
Yeah. So so how did your conclusion? How did that relate back to your hypothesis?
So I found that, contrary to my hypothesis, species B, which had high reproduction rate and low mutation rate, survived the longest, followed by species A. So this is probably because as time increased, it became more difficult for them to survive, right? But it also meant that the harmful mutations became more harmful because they were less suited to their environment. But that also meant that over time, the harmful mutations were more harmful than the helpful ones were helpful.
I see.
So the bad mutations outweighed the good mutations.
Yeah. So, but initially the high reproduction rates, I guess, produced more members of that species, so that kept them alive.
Basically it survived longer because it didn't receive as many harmful mutations and it reproduced as quickly as it could before the organisms died.
How long have you been interested in global warming?
Probably a while, but I became more interested after I started like thinking about it and wondering so a guy came to our school to talk about global warming, so that interested me. And also I read like some articles and stuff about global warming, and I was just curious to learn more.
Yeah. So what's the difference between climate and weather?
Climate and weather. So climate is the long-term weather in a specific region. Weather is more like the day-to-day stuff, like is it raining, is it sunny? Climate would be more like, is it a generally wet area, is it usually hot?
Yep. Excellent. That was the answer. That's the answer. This is a great project and it's well presented. How long did it take you to do this project?
Well, it took me a while to like code the simulation because I changed the focus of my project slightly to make it a little more testable over time, and I tried to improve my simulation to make it more efficient because the more code that's running, the slower it gets. So it took me a while to code it and to like fix the bugs, and of course when I tested it, I had to restart a bunch of times because there was like a little minor bug that changed.
So when you say code it, you wrote a computer simulation?
Yeah, so I used a program called Scratch, which is computer coding, but it's a little easier to use because it just has blocks of code that are more straightforward. And like, if you don't know much about coding, you can probably look at a Scratch program and figure out what it does more easily than that.
Okay, great. Very good. I'm very impressed.
Thank you.
Okay, well, good luck with this, and good luck. I hope you stay interested in this or other things, and just keep on spreading the message about what global warming and climate change is. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm here now with Dan Glorioso, and hi Dan, how are you?
Hi, good.
Dan, now this is a project that was done by you and
Jonathan McGurn.
Pardon me?
Jonathan McGurn.
Jonathan
Yes.
McGurn. Okay. The thing that attracted me here, glaciers. I'm interested in glaciers.
Yes.
So what's your project about?
So my project is comparing the melting rates of glaciers versus icebergs and how the melting contributes to sea level rise. So glaciers are pieces of ice that are found on land, and icebergs are pieces of ice that are found floating in the oceans.
Okay.
The difference. So for this experiment, the hypothesis was that glaciers would have a faster melting rate because they have more surface area exposed to the warmer air surrounding it and more direct sunlight that will cause it to melt faster.
Okay, so the glaciers will have a larger impact on the rise in sea level.
Yes.
Okay, and melt faster because the glaciers have a total surface. Okay, okay. Glaciers can get really big.
Yeah.
Like, how big can they get?
I didn't find that in my research. They vary.
Yeah.
Some of them could be very small, because of global warming that's already been melting them, or preserved in some places like glacier forest almost they have around the world.
Okay, so your hypothesis is clear. How did you test that?
So for this experiment, we created 2 different simulated environments. One of them that had water to represent the ocean, and one of them that had a measured amount of sand to represent the land.
Okay.
And on both environments...
So this is the one that simulated the ocean.
Yes, and that's the iceberg right
And
there.
this simulated the land?
Yeah, and that glacier, yeah. So for the procedure, we would measure the icebergs or glaciers every 15 minutes and measure their mass on a scale. And you can see that on the graph,
I say.
the decline in mass.
So were these inside? You had them in a controlled environment?
Yes, in a 17-liter plastic bucket.
Okay.
And we recorded the temperature throughout the experiments. We recorded that to see if that would impact anything.
I see, and this is recording...
That's recording the temperature of the land, the sand.
I see.
Yes.
Okay.
An outlier in this experiment was that the ice was not completely frozen, which caused the iceberg to breach at the 30-minute mark, as you can see right there. But shortly after, at the 45-minute mark, the glacier also breached, so they equaled out in the end.
I see.
So the hypothesis was supported that the glacier did melt faster, and that can show that glaciers maybe should be watched more with global warming because they contribute faster and more water to sea level rise.
What got you interested in glaciers?
So last year, it's kind of an expansion on my project last year with seeing how the addition of salt water with glaciers would affect them. And I'm interested in kind of global warming, so this is something that's important to the world to research and understand more about.
So this water here, did you use fresh water or salt water?
I use fresh water.
You use fresh water.
That may be an expansion or a change in the future.
Sure,
to make it more
that's
realistic.
Another thing. But if a glacier was flowing into an area that was already under melt, that would be a freshwater situation.
Yeah, because the ice is the ice. We did make freshwater pieces of ice, just to be realistic, with real icebergs and glaciers.
Yeah. So your hypothesis was supported.
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, actually, I shouldn't say great, because even if a hypothesis is not supported, you do learn from it.
Yep.
You absolutely learn from it. We used to have a lot of ice around here. Mile high.
Yeah.
Yeah. About 13,000 years ago. So
that may be a way you could maybe study those, the history behind glaciers and the melting that's already happened, and how that can give information to what's happening today.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one way that this sort of degrading of ice gets measured too is through coring. They core into continental ice and
then preserve it. Yes.
Yeah. This is great. I could talk to you about this for a few hours or so, but I won't. But I'd encourage you to keep up your interest.
Yep.
And if you ever want to see some places around here, come on over and talk to me with your dad.
Okay.
Okay?
Yep.
Okay, there's a lot of great places right in Littleton, like over at Oak Hill, that you can really learn a lot about glaciers. So,
Cool.
Thanks very much.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you.